Good evening, everybody. I'm Bari Helms, the Director of Archives and Library here at Reynolda. So thank you so much for joining us this evening to celebrate this pivotal moment in Reynolda's history. With the 1969 publication of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Maya Angelou positioned herself as a spokesperson for Black people, particularly women, and as a defender of Black culture. The book's success brought invitations to speak at universities throughout the country. But Angelou declined all invitations from Southern institutions, but she finally accepted two. Her first engagement was in West Virginia, and that met her low expectations. But then her next stop was in Winston-Salem. She performed from her catalog of writings in Reynolda's reception hall and spoke to a standing room only crowd at Wake Forest for the university's first Black Awareness Week. She later wrote about her experience in Ebony magazine, saying, "People cause people to change. Black North Carolinians have risked and sometimes lost their lives challenging the oppressive system. After all, the first sit-ins occurred a few miles from Wake Forest University. Courageous Black people in the state had called upon their fellow citizens to dare healthier ways of living. I knew that morning that one day I would return to the South in general, and North Carolina in particular. I would find friends, join a church, and add my energy to the positive movement to make this country more than it is today." The celebrated modernist and collage artist Romare Bearden was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and like Angelou, he left the South as a young boy during the Great Migration. But Bearden's art often echoes his time spent in the South. He once said, "I put the South in my work because it seems near to me. I can't seem to exhaust the things I remember. The South seems to me, in other words, to be more in my work than any other place." In 1982, Maya Angelou joined the Wake Forest faculty, and she made her home on land that was once part of the Reynolda estate. In October 1982, Reynolda hosted Romare Bearden and featured an exhibition of his work. It was timed to coincide with the 10th anniversary of Delta Art Center. And with Maya Angelou seated in the front row, Bearden gave a lecture in the reception hall in which he deconstructed the imagery used in his work, shared anecdotes about the Harlem Renaissance, and talked about his years in Paris. He even made sketches in the moment to illustrate his work that, unfortunately for the museum, Maya Angelou took home with her that night. So the next morning, Maya Angelou and Romare Bearden sat down in the sun porch to be interviewed by author Emily Herring Wilson. Their conversation helped further the understanding of the Black artist experience in America. Tonight's special screening will explore numerous themes such as Black culture and identity, the centrality of jazz and blues music in Black art, the Southern experience, and the importance of community. So much of this video is a product of its time. It was recorded on grainy VHS. You'll notice Maya Angelou is smoking a cigarette through most of the interview. So it's this little window into 1982, but so much of what Angelou and Bearden speak on is still relevant today. So before the film starts, I want to note that the interview will start abruptly because that is how the original recording starts. The lighting is terrible because it was originally recorded for public radio, so not much thought was given to the visuals. The recording has been edited slightly for tonight's program. The original recording is about 45 minutes long. So a portion of the interview towards the end of the recording has been edited out to allow for us to include time for the panel discussion following the interview. I'd just like to say a brief word about our sponsors. This evening was made possible by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Reynolda received an NEH grant that helped fund the exhibition Still Arise and its related programming. And as part of that grant, we were able to digitize several artist visits to the museum from the 1980s and 90s, including this visit by Romare Bearden and Maya Angelou. And with that, we can start the video.
Has to do with my experiences of growing up in Charlotte and New York, Pittsburgh, of course, all in Black communities. And I don't mind at all being called a Black artist. If, when Pearlstein and some of the others that you would call them leading white artists, and since you do not make that discrimination, just call me an American artist.
Well, I write through the Black experience again because that's what I know. And I believe it is better for any artist to use the materials with which he or she is most familiar. I'm always talking about the human condition, what it is like to be a human being, what makes us weep, what makes us laugh, what does us down, how we sometimes make it over. I too feel if I'm described as a Black artist, I am Black and I am a poet. If I'm described as a woman artist, I am a woman and I am a writer. Those two phrases, however, do not completely contain me. I am other than a Black woman artist. I am an American, I'm a human being, I'm a mother, I'm somebody's lover, I'm a good friend and a sister and a daughter, and I'm tall, and I mean, if one is going to say, why not Maya Angelou, the tall writer? It does, in a way. I mean, I feel left out if there's a group of Black artists or Black people who paint or write or sculpt or dance, and I'm not invited. Then I think, hey, you guys.
I'm Black.
Right. But I belong more to the Black community, it must be said, than I do to any other particular community than human.
Let's talk about some of these experiences which you have had in common. Both of you were born in the South, you in Arkansas, and Mr. Bearden in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. In your autobiography and in his collages, both of you have gone back to those Southern experiences. So if we continue the categories, Black, artist, and Southern, how would you see yourself as a Southern writer or a Southern artist, or as an artist who uses Southern experience in the creation of your images? What importance has the South had in your life and on your work?
The tradition in which I work, my tradition of the blues. Now, the tradition of the blues teaches you how to survive. For instance, when I was a little boy, you go to hear Bessie Smith, or one of the blues singers. And she's singing a song, I woke up this morning, and my man had left me, and I'm feeling so low down. If I feel this way this evening, I'm going down by the river, I'm going to jump in. Well, she's singing about deep existential problems. She's bereft, her love life, or the person that she's, wants to be near most is gone. But behind her, what's happening? People are what they call riffing, and they're turning a very tragic situation into a farce. Now, I spoke in my talk last night, I spoke about trying to expand certain things, and while coming from Mecklenburg to see how much outreach that I could give it. Now let's go back to ancient Greece. And here in a play of Aeschylus or Sophocles comes a procession of the Vestal Virgins, a very religious, formal, and a classic kind of presentation of these women walking in. Behind the bushes are the satyrs, these, as you know, half horse and half human. And they run in, and each of them grab one of the Vestal Virgins and run out in the woods with them. So they turn, something that started to be tragic into a comedy. And you see, so this type of what the blues means. Is this not altogether in its philosophy confined to a black situation. Do you understand what I mean? Nothing that is really artistic, say, starts from there, just like jazz music, and then it moves out because it deals with the complexities of life. So in the American situation that we have, there are only 4 real cultures that nourish what America means. That is Anglo-Saxon, people from New England, like Emily Dickinson and Thoreau, Whitman, and the rest of these great people. You have the frontiersmen like Ambrose Bierce, Mark Twain. You have the Indian, and you have the black. These are the cultures. So anyone who becomes an American is part of these cultures. So it is best to refer to people, and each of them comes from a certain segment of it. Whitman and Emerson weren't writing about black people, but they were writing about the American experience, of which Maya writes one part of it coming from there. But we're all talking about what happens in the complexities of American life.
I agree and think that the black Southern, particular Southern writer, has a different, it seems to me, a different impetus, a different pulse, rhythm, than the white Southern writer. And I mean, think of anyone from the 19th century to today. There is a kind of brooding in the white Southern writer, the better of the white Southern writers, a kind of mea culpa, which is tiresome after a while. It is enough to say that is the immediate or the first impulse, but then to get beyond it, as Mr. Bearden says, to expand on that, then to take that and build something that is universal, and healthily, if I may add, a healthily universal. It seems to be beyond the grasp of the Southern white writer. The Southern black writer does exactly, it seems to me, what Mr. Bearden says. She or he takes this tragic situation from which there seems to be no escape. Nightfall will decidedly, definitely see the person jumping in the river. However, the black Southern writer takes that, and by late afternoon, she has turned it around. He has turned it around and is on his way up to another level. Now, tomorrow morning, the blues may come again with such a reality that, as is said in a great 19th century blues song, the question is, the writer asks, have you ever had the blues so bad you could feel them in the palm of your hand? Now, the next morning, they may be back there in the palm of one's hands, but one is obliged to take that and turn it around. And I think that is not just, I think of the black Southern writer and seeing that turnaround they impose upon at once the plot as well as the structure in the book. And I see that then when I expand on that idea, I see that to be so with black Americans in total. We have taken what is in fact a new situation. The particular slavery out of which our ancestors came was totally new. No one in the history of human beings had been afflicted by chattel slavery. And yet, our people are today upwards of 30 million, having undergone incredible, absolutely incredible situations. So it seems to me that we have constantly, it seems our art, our talent, to take that grim situation and somehow laugh. Sterling Brown says, we laugh, and that makes them stop and wonder in terror.
Mr. Bearden has often described the influence of music and jazz on his life and his art. You also, I believe, have been inspired by the jazz tradition. Is that right?
It's true, yes.
Is this jazz tradition part of what you're calling the pulse?
Yes. By jazz tradition, I include, of course, I use the Black American music. So I mean the spirituals, the blues, the jazz, all of that. Whatever form. For jazz itself is a part of something that went before, which was the spiritual slave hollers, field chants, and so forth. So all of that, those are for me, the sources of inspiration for my poetry. I listen very carefully so that my music, my literature sings. When it doesn't sing off the page, I scrap it. It's got to sing. And it's got to sing a recognizable tempo and rhythm, melody. Recognizable, at least to me.
You would agree with that, Mr. Bearden?
Yes, I do. There was looking at this painting of Stuart Davis, and a very close friend of Stuart Davis was a man named John Graham. And he was a Russian and a painter. I think he wrote a book on modern art that was very widely read I believe in the 40s. And he used to sometimes annoy Davis with his ideas. That once he said he saw a man walk through a wall, and Davis was very practical, and he wouldn't speak to it for months when he said that. But he told me once that the only true stories are fairy tales. Graham said the only true stories are fairy tales. So this used to annoy Davis. But there is a book that I read it has a book which I feel has great insights and has helped me a lot. It is a book edited by Joseph Campbell and written by a man named Zimmer, and it's called The King and the Courts. And this king was a very young king and a very benighted man, and he receives people every day, bringing the complaints to him. He sits. And every day an old man comes to him and gives him an apple. And he thanks him, and they throw it out the window or dispose of it in some way. And this goes on for years. And one particular day, a monkey, one of the court monkeys, is in there playing with the king, running over the throne. And after the old man leaves, he gives the apple to the monkey. The monkey starts eating it and bites a very precious diamond. And so they said, well, let's go out there in the yard and see if there's any more apples like this. And every apple that they can find is filled with diamonds. We're not going on to the rest of the story where the king has to face the complexities of life, and he learns from the old man. But each day, you see, something happens where we have brought the apple, but we don't see what is in it, what is in this particular apple. And even when you get it, then you move to another plane and have to deal with another complexity of life. And I think this is what the and mine refer to some of the Southern writers. You read Tennessee Williams, and it is tiresome. Every white woman plays with dolls. She's a drunk, a nymphomaniac, or something like that. And the moment that you see, that she can't relate, or a mother has got her where she needs a suitor, and you can recognize this is a Tennessee Williams woman, but it is one-sided, that it don't have the fullness of life. Just women are not like that, to me. And so I think that he's not seen enough. Good dramatist though he may be, he doesn't have the fullness of the Euripides. Or yes, it's too narrow in there. I put he needs to know more about the blues and how Bessie Smith would deal with the situation.
Also, it means that I see this trend in the Southern writer to white writer, to exactly not check the apple out. Check it out and see if there's anything in it. A number of Southerners, white Southerners, it seems to me, have inherited the malaise, which is a tremendous and sometimes fatal one. The malaise of thinking that all they see is all there is, and that they deserve whatever they see. And that comes out of a slave-holding, and always, whether slave-holding or not, a racist attitude that I deserve all that my eye can see, bad as well as good. Black Americans, for some reason, have a feeling that what I deserve is what I can make out of this. So if I must take sand and straw and build bricks, then I deserve the mansion. That thing beyond just the actual eye's range, I deserve that. And I think that Southern, I'm sorry to keep beating this, but it seems you've asked something I've never had to articulate before. Southern writers, and maybe Southern whites as well, non-writers, seem to think that that apple given them each day is not only not worth assessing, but is their due. So that people who have the use of their bodies, their eyes, have food, have clothes, have some romantic attachment or familial attachment, you see them in the morning and they say, you ask, how are you? And they say, oh, God, just getting by. And I think of something my grandmother used to say when people would say to her, oh, it's so hot, I can't stand it. Or it's so cold, I just hate it. My grandmother would wait till the people would leave and she'd say, sister, there are people who went to sleep when Mrs. Jackson went to sleep last night all over this planet who will never wake again, whose beds have become their cooling boards and whose blankets have become their winding sheets. And they would give anything for 5 minutes of what that person is complaining about. 5 minutes of it. And that is the Bessie Smith attitude. That is a blues attitude.
The one writer Southern writer I would accept for this was Faulkner. He understood some of, or tried to understand some of the complexities.
You think he was successful
Well,
in creating the whole?
Well, I tell you, he's a great writer, but his style holds me back a bit. It's like cutting through a jungle with a machete or something, you know. It's
Dull
not
machete.
structured.
With a dull machete.
But I mean, he made an attempt in Light in August to try to deal, he did try to deal with some of these complexities. He made that attempt. And I would have to accept him.
Faulkner.
Yes,
Would you, Miss Angelou?
Well, I give that 10. For me, it might be wonderful that he made the attempt, in that he may be an inspiration to other young Southern white writers to go further. Mm-hmm. All of us, I mean, it is not given to us to all reach the grail, but if we can be an encouragement and a stepping stone for someone else, then that's fine. One hasn't lived in vain. I suppose that's always my greatest fear.
Both of you left the South, you to California and Mr. Bearden to Pittsburgh and then to New York. You were children and you left for family reasons. Would you have left the South? Would it have been necessary for you to leave the South to find yourselves as artists? If circumstances had not dictated, would you have made that choice?
I would have, yes.
For what reasons?
Well, the constraints of overt racism burden the soul. And at some point, the soul has got to be free. I don't know what that means, free, but one cannot be put forever into a tiny prison, figuratively, without that prison affecting and afflicting the buoyancy of the soul. George Moses Horton, around 1850, here in North Carolina, wrote to Horace Greeley, and he was a slave, Mr. Horton, and he said, "Strike the fetters from my legs and bid the vassal soar." Soar. It is. That is not to say that there aren't great writers who can live within restrictions, but usually when they are self-imposed, that's one thing. But when a larger society says that because of the color of your skin, you cannot, for one thing, have the books to read, which you must read. You can't go to the museums to see the paintings, which you must see. You must have them inside your machine.
Strike the fetters.
Yes, exactly.
Let me conclude this interview with asking you to talk about some of those places where both of you went when you left the South. First of all, both of you found Harlem apparently very stimulating, in the Harlem Artists Guild, and the Harlem Writers Guild, and the Apollo Theater, and the jazz performances. And then later, both of you lived in Europe. If you will look at those two places of the imagination or geography, first of all, Harlem, and what Harlem did for you to stimulate you as an artist and a person.
Well, the first time I went to New York in 1952 with the scholarship to dance, to study with Pearl Primus, I couldn't believe that there were that many black people in the world. It was the most exciting thing. I mean, no white American particularly, or very, very few Europeans, can imagine what it is like to be a member of a visible minority. For everywhere you look, you see reflections of yourselves. For us, we are always aware that we are 2 blacks in the room, 1 black in the room, 5 blacks in the town, 10, 1,500 in the... You're always aware, one is always aware. I had grown up in Stamps, Arkansas, with a population of 3,000 or so, and gone to San Francisco, where the black population was small. And I went to Harlem. I couldn't believe. I talked to people. I would walk up to groups of people, and then just start talking. It absolutely bowled me over. It was a kind of affirmation that it was all right to be black and to laugh and to swing my hips and to love children. All the things that I had found to be unique in me, I found millions of people who had the same unique talents and virtues. By dancing, I was with a group of jazz musicians, and many people used different kinds of drugs and things, but everyone understood because I was a dancer, my body was my instrument, and everyone understood taking care of one's instrument. So no one ever, if a stranger offered me something, one of the now very famous, or maybe now dead, jazz musicians would say, don't offer it to her, she doesn't do that. But I was around when Dizzy and Max and incredible musicians were creating a new music, and there were new dances and new writing. And so I dared a lot. And so Harlem gave me, by the energy there, by the confluence of all those energies, gave me the right to be bodacious. And I took that right and use it still today. Took it all over the world, took it to Europe, took it to Africa, took it to North Africa, and brought it to Winston-Salem. I am absolutely, utterly, unabashedly, and eternally bodacious.
How would you describe yourself, Mr. Bearden? Are you bodacious?
I hope so. It was well put.
Panelists will join me on the stage for discussion, and we will take questions from the audience as well. If you have questions, if you would come to the mic so that we can capture that on the video. So our panelists tonight are Julia Jordan-Zachery, a professor and chair of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department at Wake Forest. Her interdisciplinary research focuses on African American women and public policy. She's the author of the award-winning book, Black Women, Cultural Images and Social Policy, and Shadow Bodies, Black Women, Ideology, Representation, and Politics, along with several articles and edited volumes, including Black Girl Magic, Beyond the Hashtag. She has produced a documentary, Healing Roots, and she serves as the president of the Association for Ethnic Studies. Megan Mulder is the Special Collections Librarian and curator of rare books and literary manuscripts in the Special Collection and Archives Department at Wake Forest, Z. Smith Reynolds Library. The department's holdings include Dr. Angelou's publications, as well as the Maya Angelou Film and Theater Collection, an extensive collection of unpublished material donated by Dr. Angelou, which documents her career in the performing arts. And lastly, Peggy Moore is a North Carolina native with a BA from Livingstone College and an MLS from Atlanta University. She's held positions at Winston-Salem State University and Carver High School. Since the mid-1980s, she has been involved with Delta Art Center as a board member, a past board president, chair of the program committee, and a member of the Exhibition and Funds Development Committee. So I'll get started with just a opening question of representation matters. So this dialogue between these two great artists speaking on identity and craft, it was crucial to have happen in the 80s, but what pieces of this conversation are really resonating with you as we watched it almost 40 years later?
I was particularly taken with, I don't know if it's on or not, with Maya's references to herself as bodacious. We dealt with Dr. Angelou over the years, a number of times with Winston-Salem Delta Fine Arts and the Delta Arts Center, and we always found her to be bodacious, very upfront with what she wanted to do with us, how she wanted it done. I remember on one occasion when we were at her home and she was talking about interacting with the community and offering her services or her talents to the community for the benefit of the community. And she just very boldly said, "I will be used, but I will not be abused." And I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. That described her perfectly. And so that part of the conversation stuck with me because it just seemed to represent Dr. Angelou in my eyes. Even before I became involved with her with Delta Fine Arts, and I was at Winston-Salem State, and I was telling the ladies about the program earlier, and we had Dr. Angelou come to a session in the library, and it was a program in which we invited senior members of the community to come in and become acquainted with writing and books, and we were young librarians. The university had about 4 of us at the same time, and we were excited to bring her, but then when we looked at our audience who was coming in, we said, well, these are older people. Maybe they will be offended by some of what Maya is going to say tonight. And so, but what she chose to read to them was the segment of Caged Bird Sings with the church scene, which was just an absolutely hilarious scene, where the minister would preach and the sister would get in the spirit and she would come forward every Sunday and she would attack the minister and in her zeal. And so they had stationed these deacons around the minister to protect him from this lady. And Maya's reading all this, and it's so funny. But the lady manages to get past all of these people who were protecting the minister, and she, in her zealousness, hits the minister in the back and his false teeth fly out. And the audience, she just captivated the audience with that particular story. She just knew how to do that. And so she just had that way about her, and it came out on every occasion that we had the opportunity to spend with her. She indeed was bodacious. She described herself perfectly.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, kind of from the archival historical perspective, you know, that this event took place in 1982, which was the year that she was appointed to her chair faculty position at Wake Forest. So, just thinking about that, it was interesting, you know, to think of it in that historical perspective, and that this was, you know, perhaps for a lot of people in the Winston-Salem community, their first introduction to Maya Angelou in person, and you know, kind of how she was. I felt like part of it, she was kind of aware of that. She was always, you know, he said, very aware of her audience and knew how to, you know, she had a long career in the performing arts, so she really knew how to interact with an audience and how to tailor her presentations to her audience. I feel like she was sort of, you know, this was in some ways, you know, one of her first introductions to the Winston-Salem community, since that was one of her real purposes in taking the job at, you know, at Wake Forest, was that she wanted to be involved in the community. She was kind of the opposite of the, you know, celebrity professor who flies in and teaches a class and then goes out. One of her purposes was to really become involved in the cultural life, and you can see her, you know, doing that in real time here. So that was really interesting.
So I wanted to ask about the intersection of identity and craft, and particularly how that resonates with me. And 40 years later, we're still working through this notion of identity and craft and how society receives one's identity. And Maya Angelou mentions that she's multiple things in addition to being Black and female. She's mother, she's daughter, she's lover, etc. And yet we tend to see one element of identity. And yes, they talk about being visible. And Maya, I believe it was Maya Angelou, who speak about what it means to be a visible minority, to be on the margins of society. And that really resonates as a Black female academic. It's something that I'm constantly having to navigate, this notion of identity and craft. And I remember really early in my career, I was told not to study Black women, not to write on Black women, that I would be pigeonholed and not receive tenure. Because after all, there wasn't enough out there to write about Black women. In fact, in my first book, I was explicitly told there wasn't enough to write about Black women for an entire book, as though Black women didn't exist from the beginning of time. And so I chuckle about that, this notion of identity and craft, and how we write from a place of identity, even though society tells us that certain identities matter less and aren't worthy of being written about. And so for me, what really resonated 40 years later is how so many of us are still dealing with these types of questions. And in fact, they are big questions, right? They're not just personal questions, they're really big questions for society. How do we allow those of us who dance on the margins to speak? And to speak from what elements of their identity, right? And so that's what really has resonated with me around this notion of identity and craft.
That was actually a segues right into my next question. Is they discuss a lot this label of Black artist, and Bearden says he doesn't mind being called a Black artist, but we're not calling white artists. So he would just rather be an American artist. So how do you think the feelings around, if they were having this conversation today, do you think they would still be having those same feelings, or would their feelings have evolved, or?
So it's hard to really speak on people's feelings, especially when you don't know them. They're not there. But I do imagine, in my wild imagination, right? And I have a very wild imagination. I can see, Dr. Angelou and Mr. Bearden having this conversation and still lamenting around this notion of Blackness, because Blackness remains on the margin. So 40 years later, Blackness is still on the margins. Something to be, at times, commercialized and consumed as needed, and expelled when no longer needed. And there's a role for Black artists, I would argue, in telling these types of stories, even though some of us might be made uncomfortable by the bodaciousness of being able to tell these stories, that whiteness in particular can consume Blackness in particular ways and use it for purposes, and then expel it when no longer needed. So in my very wild imagination, I can see them having a kind of continuity of this conversation. And I think when they're talking about this label of Black artist, it's not so much that it's being defined as a Black artist. I think it's a much larger conversation, right? Around how we see and value particular types of work, how we see and value particular types of words and art and things of that nature. And is there a space in society for any of us to just be seen as this is what we're contributing to society? And it matters to all of us, not just certain populations, for example. So again, and I listen to me carefully, I am not ever going to say that my work is anything comparable to Maya Angelou or to Romare Bearden. But I write from a very Black perspective for Black folk to be able to see ourselves, but I'm also writing for other people other than Black folk to see Black people, right? And so I think that they would still see themselves as Black artists because society still has not seen us, those of us who consider ourselves Black. So that's what I'm imagining.
That's a great answer. Julia, both you and Peggy sort of touched on Maya Angelou describing herself as bodacious, and that's probably one of my favorite parts of the interview. I liked ending on this sort of uplifting moment of, you just sort of get a glimpse of how she's thinks of herself as an artist, this moment in time in Harlem where she really started to recognize her self-worth. So what qualities, talents, and virtues do you think Maya Angelou was specifically referencing when she used the word bodacious?
Courage, audacity, stubbornness. She refused to be pigeonholed. She took life as it came to her, and as she said, made the best of it. Moved herself to an area of inspiration for others, and in that regard, I think that's how I see her as being bodacious. She just did not allow herself to be put in a place, like she said, and kept there. She was too big for that. She knew she was too big for that, and she moved beyond it.
That's another thing that really comes through, when you look at her archives too, you can just kind of see that she, a lot of people told her that she shouldn't, there are things she shouldn't be doing, that's not an appropriate role for you, and she just kind of, persisted, and she wasn't, she was unsuccessful, not always. One of the interesting things in this collection, which I have some samples which you're welcome to come up and look at, some materials from the collection, actually, they're very interesting. But one of the things that she really wanted to do, her original goal was not so much to be an author, but she really wanted to be a filmmaker. She wanted to write and direct films. She wanted to be a director. She was the first Black woman to be a member of the Directors Guild, the U.S. Directors Guild, and she wanted to direct feature films, and she made a lot of attempts. And one of the things that is really interesting that our collection documents is her, interactions with Hollywood and basically being thwarted. She was never allowed to direct a feature film. There were just too many roadblocks. There are a lot of roadblocks for Black women today. So, 50 years ago, it was even more so. That's just one example that, despite the fact of being told over and over, no, this isn't a role for you, you can't do this, this isn't. She didn't let other people's opinions, thwart her. And that's kind of one of the things I thought of when she was describing
herself. Megan, do you want to talk a little bit more about what you brought tonight, or what's in the collection?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. So the Maya Angelou Film and Theater Collection, like I said, is a large collection of Dr. Angelou's personal papers and manuscripts, which she donated to Wake Forest Library Special Collections and Archives in 2001. It is one of two major collections of her manuscripts. The other collection is her literary papers, which are at the Schomburg Center of the New York Public Library. So basically anyone who does research about Maya Angelou is doing any projects will go to the Schomburg and to us at Wake Forest. It is a large collection. It's about 80 boxes of stuff because she had a really extensive career in the performing arts. I think people kind of think of her today primarily for her poetry and her memoirs. That's what she's really well known for, but she started out, she had a 20-year career in performing arts before she wrote Page Bird. She was a trained singer and dancer. She talked about, she was an actor, she was a playwright. She wanted to be a director, she wanted to direct and make films. So our collection really documents that, and I think it's very sort of relevant to what we're talking about today because a lot of what is in there shows her making connections between all the different art forms. One of the things I have is a script that she wrote for a PBS series on African American history, about African American arts, and she talks about Bessie Smith and painters and different artists. Her connecting with different art forms, her really emphasis on the importance of the continuity of history, of the legacy of Black artists from the beginning to the present, and her seeing herself as kind of a part of this history, like she talks about a little bit in the film today too. And then really, again, also the theme of the importance of the arts in the Black community, in creating community and overcoming hardship and, turning difficult experiences into art is another thing that's really well documented, in this collection. So if you are interested in any of that, I encourage you to come and take a look at this stuff today and learn more about this collection. It's a great resource and really kind of gives you a lot of insight into her life and work.
Thank you. We have about 10 minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a docent here at Reynolda House, and through the summer I've been able to give tours to Black children who are going to camps and come here as part of that experience. And when I take them to Still I Rise upstairs, generally the counselors recognize Maya Angelou, but the younger children do not. Is that a case of they're simply too young to know, or is the legacy in jeopardy? And is there a solution for that?
I'm smiling because that's a big question about how we as a society hold on to legacy and who's responsible for the legacy, right? Maybe it's a combination. It might not be either or. It could be a combination of age, but it can also be the result of education and exposure, right? So who are we teaching in our schools? Who's considered to be worthy of being taught? Do we relegate individuals to only particular months so that students only see them once every blue moon and don't begin to think of them as integral to American society or society at large because they're only taught women's history, Black history, Asian American History Month, for example, right? And I want to go back a little bit and think through what was originally Black History Week that eventually became Black History Month. And the argument was made as to why we needed Black history and how long would we need Black History Week and then month. And the argument was we need it for as long as it's no longer needed, until everybody is aware of the contributions of Black folk in the Americas. And so every semester I teach, I ask my students to engage in a project. And it's to list 10 Black Americans that have influenced American society. And I let them start. And then I say, take out athletes, take out singers, take out Michelle and Barack Obama. Who do you have left? Can you go beyond, can you go into the 1800s and list somebody? To this day, I've been doing this for years. I've had one student have 10 people on their list. And for the most part, students cannot make a list. And that is a symptom of what I think you're getting at. And it falls on all of us. It falls on every one of us in this room to ensure that education happens in the classroom, but education also becomes so integral to what we do in life that it's commonplace. Where we're seeing these individuals not as these heroes to worship and pull out only as needed, but as great contributors that force us to ask these big questions. What is society? How are we imagining society? What is justice? What is fairness? What is democracy? Right? And when we do that and we make these individuals so common and available to all of us, then maybe these little folk will know the Maya Angelous of the world.
Is there another audience question? My final question does sort of piggyback a little bit on the last of that, the previous question. It's just, what of this interview do you think could connect most with an emerging generation that's facing more than most right now?
think the part of the story where they talk about the blues and how Black people internalize blues and feelings and situations, and how you move beyond that feeling right then until the next feeling of I can do something more with this. There's not a finality in what you are experiencing. That there is, you must go through it, and then you must go beyond. I think that's what I feel like.
I think, the sense of resilience is important. I think too, what she said, what we watched today, and also in her work in her archives in general, of just that she was very conscious of being a part of history, that she learned from the people who came before her, and that she would influence people who came after, but that she wasn't going to do everything. No one person was going to accomplish everything. It's a process, that there are going to be setbacks, and you just, you keep going. So I think that's a good message for her. Yeah.
I think Romare Bearden said it well when you gave the analogy of the apple. And that we're given things, that sometimes we get so caught up that we don't see what we're given. And we toss the treasure. We toss the treasure. And I think, I was taking some notes as I'm watching this. And I'm like, okay, I have got, when I teach, to remind my students to not toss the treasure. And I also have to remind myself of that, right? How many apples, I wrote this, I put it in a note on my phone. How many apples have I tossed out the window? Right? And I think Maya Angelou also talked about that when she used the analogy of Black folk taking the sand, and what did she say? Taking the sand and the straw, thank you, and making bricks, right? And I remember, and that made me remember something my mother used to say to me, which she got from a reading, which is let down your bucket where you are. Use what you have. And don't steadily wait for something that might or might not materialize. And so those are some of the things that I think that I want to offer my students this semester. To be reminded to offer them that, but not just offer it in an abstract way, but also offer it in the way that you live. Because I think that's what's captivating for me, for both Maya Angelou and Romare Bearden, right? Is that they didn't just give us these words, these beautiful words, this beautiful art, like the collages are so amazingly beautiful. But they gave us a way of being, of existing, right? And they lived their art. They weren't just artists for being artists' sake, but they embodied it. So what does that mean to embody what you do? Right? As we live through, I keep calling it the plagues, plural, because that's what it feels like. Right? And I have a 22-year-old daughter, and she was going down a list of things that in her 22 years that she's experienced. And she said to me, she's the first generation that was born into a continuous war. She's like, in her entire life, the U.S. has been at war. And that made me sit down and think, what do we offer that generation other than war? And I think these two artists embody their work in a way that is so compelling and beautiful. And I'm going to use the term haunting, even though I don't know that that's necessarily the right word, because we associate haunting with negativity, and I don't want to use haunting in a negative way, but there's something very haunting. And it's a spirit that calls us to be, to do, to challenge. And we see that in both of their work. And so how do we give to generations that are coming after us that spirit, that haunting, so that they can move into doing? And I think for me, in watching this again, that's kind of what I'm left with, as like almost like a task that I have to engage in, is to, through my being, embody the doing of the future that I'm imagining, because that's what they did in their art, and that's what they did in their person and their being. That's it for me.
I love that sentiment that they live their art. We have time for one last question for the audience, if anyone has one. Thank you, panelists, so much for sharing your insights tonight. And thank you, audience, for coming out and sharing this moment and getting to watch this again 40 years. Maybe we'll be here in 40 more years. Thank you.